Good afternoon, everyone. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Bedegal peoples of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are here today. And welcome everyone to the last session of the 22nd WCGTC Biennial World Conference. You know, when there's those once-in-a-lifetime occasions, well, this is more than one for me. I've been part of an amazing team of people who have put this event together, where over 700 like-minded people from around the world have gathered to advocate for gifted children and youth, share research, effective practice, network, and eat really good food. Plus, we've had the sunshine with us as well. This is the third World Conference held in Australia, and now the World Conference is held here through the School of Education's GERIC at my own university, the University of New South Wales, in my own country. And we're meeting many of the greats of gifted education in one place and listening to many of the emerging experts, exceptional practitioners and consultants and parents and youth and students and other passionate advocates from so many different parts of Australia and the world. But all of that pales into insignificance when I think another first for me is having the honour of introducing Dr. Karen Rogers, Professor Emerita of Gifted Studies at the University of St. Thomas in Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA. She is also a professorial fellow at the University of Wollongong and an honorary professor at the University of New South Wales. If you researched Professor Rogers' contribution to gifted education, you'd find she's still teaching and still conducting research, still publishing and serving as an advisor or an officer in several professional organisations in the US, and sits on several advisory boards. Her special interests in the field include instructional management practices, gifted programming, curriculum differentiation, and she has expertise in research-based gifted practices via research syntheses in the field, especially concerning acceleration and ability grouping, and has additional interests in arts education, cognitive processing, parenting, creativity, gifted program development and evaluation, and twice exceptional education. This latter interest is a result of a Javits research grant about which she has developed books of what was discovered about how these learners learn and what teachers can specifically do to ensure both giftedness and the disability are addressed appropriately. She's been an invited lecturer at several universities in the United States and Australia and the world, and is a frequent keynote speaker for state, national and international conferences on gifted education. Karen is the author of more than 200 journal articles, 25 book chapters, and 4 books and another co-authored. She has completed 75 program evaluations and over 500 presentations at national and international conferences and 12 monographs or official reports. More than 500,000 people worldwide have read her paper on ability grouping. And she's served on many editorial boards and been a reviewer for all the top journals in the field. She's been an elementary teacher and a coordinator of programs for gifted students, and was the curriculum author and creator of the widely heralded Omnibus Enrichment Program for Gifted Children, a program that's still being used in 23 US states. She's advised many PhD students to successful conclusion, as well as mentored many others, me among those. I'm sure if I asked you to put up your hand, if you were someone who actually referenced Karen's work in your research or presentations, just about everybody would put up their hand, or there'd be a great many. For sure. Same for me. I have been referencing Karen for at least 2 decades, I'm sure, and this demonstrates the depth of her research and the quality of the practical application of her work. She's not only supported students, teachers and parent programs here at the Gifted Education Research and Resource Information Centre, GERIC, but has been director of GERIC at one stage, working with Professor Emerita Miraca Gross. So Karen's influence has gone further afield than being a scholar to nurturing young scholars for the future. And I'm sure that Karen would probably say, though, that her greatest achievement has been her 3 gifted children and her 10 grandchildren, 9 of which have been formally identified as being gifted. The others too young to identify. Karen, you are very special to very many people around the world, and we are delighted that you could come and present a keynote today. And on that note, welcome back, and please join me in welcoming Karen for the keynote today.
Hello to all of you. Before we begin, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to do this. This to me is kind of like the highlight of my life, to be able to come back to a country I love so much and actually be able to give a keynote. So it's really a pleasure to be here. I know that it's kind of difficult to be the last keynote you've heard, because we have heard a lot of spectacular ones. It's been particularly difficult for me because I've heard such professional ones, and I don't think I can do it at the same level as all those other people. So I'm going to do my best, but I'm not so sure there. And I also appreciate your being here for this last one, because I don't know about you, but isn't your mental energy beginning to flag? Let alone your sitting muscles, right, from all the sitting we've done. So I've been invited today to talk about, I noticed that I have misspelled the USA. That's a good sign, isn't it? Yeah. Noticed it this morning, okay. But I've been invited to talk about twice exceptionality, and as I was kind of surveying our program, you had 11 presentations on twice exceptionality. I'm not sure what I can add after that. I looked at it, and I think you had 219 presentations total, counting your keynotes and all of the individual presentations that were done, which means that 9.2% of your presentations have been on twice exceptionality. Had you figured that one out, right? It's kind of interesting. So obviously, I think what it's saying is that twice exceptional is truly an international or global issue at this point for many of our countries that are in this organization. I want to say, too, that I enjoyed the many twice exceptional presentations that I went to myself. They were very well done, well prepared, and some very promising practices, both in identification and supporting twice exceptional children, are occurring across the world. It isn't all happening in one country. It's happening across many, many countries. And I think one of our leaders in this field has been Australia. So keep going. Good on you in what you're doing. So the focus on twice exceptionality is alive and well, I think. So what am I going to be able to say at this point? Unfortunately, I think I cannot go into any kind of detail on all the different kinds of twice exceptionality we can find, and many of the sessions did do that, so hopefully you were able to attend some of those. I'm going to try to see what I can do to generalize across twice exceptionality. Don't gasp in horror, right? Because obviously we're talking about very unique individual learners, but are there some commonalities as we look across them. And I don't mind at all if you talk to me after our concluding ceremonies, if you feel I'm wrong in trying to put it all together in one, because I know it's very difficult to do. It was a very difficult decision to make. But so here we go. Here are the talking points. As you can see, who are these learners really? Why do so few of them mean so much? I'm amazed at how many people have come forward with what they see as twice exceptional learners. So it seems as if there are millions of them, but if we look at prevalence data, we wouldn't expect there to be as many, and yet there are, right? So that's going to be something we'll talk about a little bit, because there are very many perspectives on prevalence. Do twice exceptional learners have anything in common, right? How many think they do at this point? Good, then at least I'll be talking to some people who might believe what I have to say. And what can we expect if we do not put out the effort on these students, right? I promise I won't paint a maudlin picture. We're going to look at a continuum of consequences at this point. And how do we find these learners systematically? Just in a few words, very difficult to do. And again, as I said, promising practices going on that go well beyond what I can say in my few minutes. And then how do we support these learners uniquely, right? So are you okay with this agenda? Okay. So I wanted to start this, and many of you may have seen the 2E film that Tom Ropalewski put out about 2.5 years ago. And he really got inspired, I think, by his own child who attended the Bridges Academy. And I felt that rather than my giving you lists of characteristics, which you can read anytime but aren't alive, that I would just ask you to spend maybe about 8 minutes looking at these children from this school, because I think they tell their own story better than a list on a piece of paper does. So bear with me on this. Hopefully it works now. I've been practicing. It's Pi Day.
3.141592653589793238462638327950288419716959644 6229 489549303819 96442881097566593344612. Math is kind of cool the way it works and stuff. I don't know, it's also very colorful. Because I have that thing, I forgot what it's called, where you see the numbers and letters and colors and stuff.
I hyper-focus and I have a hard time focusing. So the hyper-focusing is what comes in handy with the animation. I can focus on one thing for hours on end, not eating, not sleeping, not anything.
Life was something I was scared of. I was just extremely anxious, and the copious amounts of medication didn't help either. I was in the car as a little kid, and I'd feel the bass, and that was something I really wanted, was a physical interaction with music, and bass kind of really filled that.
844-609-55058. One of my main issues was that I was often socially, if they say no man is an island, then I was a very isolated peninsula connected to the mainland by tiny isthmus. 3.1415926535897.
Twice exceptional is different for each person, but I'd say to trying to find the general, twice exceptional kid would be someone extremely creative with a lot of drive to do whatever they set their mind to. But also I'd say they've got a variety of problems. It could be, not necessarily a problem. It's work throughable. You can work through it easily. Well, not easily, but you can work through it.
You know, he was a happy, happy baby. He was really a smiley kid for about 2 years. And then something happened between 2 and 3 when he started preschool. He developed this volatility.
He couldn't focus at all on something, or he would hyper-focus. You can walk into a room and you can set a bomb off and he wouldn't notice that it had happened.
Kind of like you.
Yeah, he wouldn't notice that it had happened. Or he couldn't focus at all on something and he couldn't get it done. So you had this interesting kid who was very gifted at things that he did. He could do things from a young age, whether it was artistic, whether it was musical.
Yeah.
No issues at school as well, as far as performance.
Right.
He was able to learn anything, to do anything. He was very, very sharp. But on a social context or on the anxiety scale, that's really where the issues were.
I think with them, it was simply a matter of they didn't really know what was going on. I mean, I didn't really know what was going on at the time, to be honest. It was a general lack of knowledge, and it all combined into this amalgamation of, well, a bad time.
Nobody had figured out that it was Tourette's yet, because Tourette's is discrete, but it came in a package with obsessive compulsive stuff, you know, the hyper-focused, not hyper-focused, ADD. I mean, he could not stay still.
And he suddenly started having motor tics. He would make, faces with his jaw, his eyes. He'd make signs with his hands. He'd start bending at the waist. He would start doing all these things. And I mean, it's kind of funny. You would think, on the one hand, you'd think, oh my gosh, I just found out my son has Tourette's. The other hand, it's like this huge relief. It's like suddenly, oh my gosh, we now know what's going on here.
I remember there was a time where I took him to California Pizza Kitchen, and I said, do you want to come in or not? And at that point, he was making a screech sound that was like ear piercing, a screech. And I timed it. It was every 10 seconds until he lost his voice. And then he was still trying to make the sound. So it was in that period. And I said, do you want to come in or do you want to, stay out here in the car? I'll get it to go. He said, I want to come in. He came in and he did those screeches. And I remember the entire restaurant, everybody looking at us. I was not making it up. They were looking at us. The chefs were looking out from the kitchen to see him, see what it was. And I remember this just feeling hot all over, and the sweat was coming out on me, and I was holding his hand, and he put his head in his hands. And I thought he was so brave. He was so brave. And I said something to the person next to me who was looking at him. I said, he has Tourette's. And he says, I know, I'm just looking. And so, Harry's bravery and his helping us to get out of what was normal, what is normal, was a real gift. It was hard for everybody, but it was a real gift.
Everyone calls this 2E, and no one understands how many categories there are within that.
He always had obsessions. He would find something that fascinated him, whether it was sharks or dinosaurs, and he explored this subject to nauseam. And he would talk about it, and mostly to adults, because those were the people that engaged with him mostly, because the kids were like, we're over it, and went and played. I didn't really understand that Daniel was really different in school till later. There weren't big alarm clocks that went off, because we found out later he had memorized everything. He had memorized every single flag of the world. It was a pretty good reader. Learning how to write was a challenge, but a lot of teachers would say that's not unusual for boys. But then, as he got older, he started to show signs of anxiety in school.
At a young age, I was very obsessed with death and age, and how life could be just kind of taken away very, very fast. And a couple of years earlier, I was in Israel, and I was traumatized by the war there, and it kind of spilled over into my subconscious, and it really screwed with me.
Then one day I came home, and I noticed that there was a big chunk in the back of his head, and I was in shock, and I went, Daniel, what's going on? And did you know that you're doing this? And he said, yeah, I'm pulling out my hair. I said, well, what do you mean you're pulling out your hair? He says, well, I get really nervous when I go out of the yard, And I get really nervous when I have to take tests. And I was like, that's when I really realized, okay, this isn't typical anxiety. There's something big.
My main issue was breathing anxieties, and that really screwed with me because, death for me meant no breathing. Other people saw it as getting shot or getting hit by. I saw it as if I can't breathe, I'm done. So I was on Zoloft, which isn't supposed to have that many side effects, but I clearly remember having drug out moments, and my hand seemed so small and things moving by really fast.
The school partnered with us and we decided to get him tested. What's going on? Why is he not understanding? So we had this extensive testing going on, and lo and behold, there was a huge learning difference. It made complete sense of why he was having so much anxiety about school and why he wasn't doing well and performing, what really was going on in his head. I didn't really know people that had kids like Danielle. We were in a loving community, but their kids were mainstreamed and doing great. So the psychiatrist suggested a place called Bridges.
We won't go into Bridges at this point, but hopefully some of you get the privilege someday, if you haven't already, of visiting that particular school. I know that was a very long thing, but I think it was probably a little bit better, even if it's a review, to see these students and what they say about themselves, as well as what their parents are dealing with or are trying to handle. And if you haven't seen the film, it's wonderful because it does give us some insight into what their wonderful teachers have been able to accomplish with them as well. So get yourself a copy if you don't have it already. I know there's a second one coming out, so I'm looking forward to seeing that one. Now, what you have in front of you is something which may arouse some ire in people, because I think we've seen a lot of little articles and magazine articles and newspapers in particular who like to say, okay, well, so-and-so was, specific learning disability twice exceptional, something along that line. And I thought, well, what I'll do is try to compile a list from all of these claims that have been made, and I'm calling them claims. There are autobiographies that have been analyzed that suggest to us that Thomas Jefferson was on the spectrum, those kinds of things. You can read whole books, Diagnosing Jefferson, those kinds of things. Many of these are self-admitted. Those are the more current ones. Particularly actors and actresses seem to be able to describe those particular exceptionalities in themselves. But as I was looking at this list, and I don't know how you can read it, it's pretty small writing. As I was looking at this list, there's something unique about every name that's up there if you know about that person. Maybe there is a Harry or a Sidney or a Danielle, as he's called, in there. I don't know. But again, the claims that have been made about them, they aren't, for example, there are people on the ASD list there, so gifted and with the autism spectrum disorder, who are being called that, and basically Asperger's didn't put out his theory until 1944, right? So questions could be asked about the list there, but it is interesting to contemplate, I think, the names you see up there. And I don't know about you, but I'm not seeing a lot of patterns. I think you're just as likely to see an actor or a writer in the specific learning disability category as in the EBD, emotional behavioral disorder category. If you see patterns, you can let me know afterwards, but it's kind of interesting to look at that list. And then I've got a starter for you of what we need to do when this is over, and that is what's going on in literature with including what we would call twice exceptional protagonists in our stories. And I just started with a few which deal with the autism spectrum that we've talked about in terms of giftedness. But just imagine if you started doing it for all the other ones that are out there. And they don't have to be necessarily called by those names in the books, but they're there. So that might be a fun project for someone to do sometime, especially if they're actually working with twice exceptional children, just to let them know and see that there are others like themselves, I think would be an important strategy. So now we'll go beyond that and get to whether or not it's worth the effort. And my first kind of topic on this is how many students are we talking about who would be in these categories, right? And then we look at what happens if we don't put out the effort for them, and just how much effort is going to be required of teachers. Obviously, in this short time, I can't talk about that on the day-to-day basis, but just generally, what do we need to have done for them despite the specificity of the disabilities that they might have. And then what outcomes might we expect if we do put out the effort for them, right? And I'll share a couple of family personal stories in terms of that as we get to the end. So let's start with the prevalence of it. I found 3 sources. The first, I think, very strong source is from Australia, and that was Michelle Ronks-Cleave-Pavia. You'll have to tell me if you think I'm wrong on this, but it seemed to me that she'd done a fairly systematic job in trying to identify the prevalence of twice exceptional children. She used the 2009 Australian Bureau of Statistics information, which suggested at that time that there were 4,115,334 children in Australian schools at that point. And according to the statistics at that time, 7% of them were identified with a disability. And she calculated that number is about 288,000 students with a disability. Then she took this idea that when we're talking about giftedness, maybe we're talking about the top 10%, right, of our population in Australia. I'm saying of your population in Australia. And if we did that, you can see that the calculation would be about 411,533 gifted students, right? You all knew that, right? I'm telling you something you know already, right? Sorry about that. Should compact. And then putting this all together, she was estimating, again, if boys account for about 9% of twice exceptionality and girls about 5%, if you calculated that out, we'd be talking about 32,923 children with twice exceptionalities, right? So is it worth the effort? It is, isn't it? That's quite a few children. Not all in one place, we hope. You know, we can find some way to spread them out so we can really pay attention to them, but quite a few children. So I thought that was an interesting way for us to look at some of this prevalence data. The second source that we have up there is the work that Linda Silverman has done. It is based on her own clinical samples, and I believe at this time she's tested around 4,000 students. And what she is saying, that what she has found is about 1/6 of those students are twice exceptional, right? So if you looked at the listing in our U.S. data for 2006, which was the latest I could find, isn't that sad? 2006, we would be talking about, now I've got to read this, if her clinical data were to be generalized, we would expect there to be 70,000 twice exceptional children. Now, I told you 32,000 in Australia, right? So you can tell this is a conservative underestimate. I don't think that necessarily means Linda is wrong. It means that our Bureau of Statistics hasn't done a very adequate job of collecting the number of students who are out there in our schools. States aren't required to supply the information. You know, it's not a nationwide thing. So anyway, we are talking about large numbers. But if one considers a country of 325 million, we certainly should have more than that. So I like what Michelle has done. I think it maybe gets us closer to where we might be in terms of prevalence. And then I wanted to share the data that we collected in the study I did, the government project that I had on twice exceptionality. And we collected information on children who were gifted and ADD or ADHD, on children who were gifted and had emotional or behavioral disorder, children who were on the gifted children who were on the autism spectrum, and children who were specific learning disabilities. In our study, we found that overall, if you looked at the students who were in the study, approximately 20% of our total gifted sample were twice exceptional, and you can kind of see the percents that were involved for them in the different categories that were used in our study. Certainly those aren't all the categories of exceptionality, but we had to stop somewhere. So there's where we stopped. And if you look at this, we had 363 students in this study. They were in years 4 and 5. We found that, the twice exceptionality was very definitely there. The other thing was that I was able to do a K-8 study in one school that was an all-gifted school, and we looked at the twice exceptional students in that one school year by year. And we did find that we were more likely to find twice exceptionality in the primary years of that program in the ASD area and the ADD. Did I say ADD? Yeah. And then once they got to about year 6, we began to see SLD really rear its ugly head, as well as EBD become a serious issue in terms of twice exceptionality. If you look at the general literature, and notice I didn't say research, I said literature for a reason, our claims have been much higher than that. So 16% of gifted and talented have been claimed as having also an attention deficit disorder of one kind or another. 7%, 5 to 7% with an emotional or behavioral problem, 3 to 16% in the autism spectrum disorder, and 3 to 36%, don't you love it, in the gifted SLD area, right? So again, literature, not specific samples that are giving us those numbers. Whatever the message is, I think the prevalence is there. It's not something we can just slide under the rug and not do anything about. Am I right? Yeah, okay. So do we need an agreed upon definition? I've listened to several during the presentations in the last few days. Every single one seems to be very good. So you're not, I can't say that you're not using them, but I thought just to put up the U.S. perspective on this, I would give you the one that I like the most. It's the most direct for me. And that's by Susan Asseline. Have I got it on there? Yeah. Susan Asseline and Megan Foley, Nick Pond. And it's their 2006 definition. They're one of the Bell and Blank Center is one of the areas in the United States that really has had a concerted effort to gather data on these kids and provide what little research we do have in the field. They say that a learner is considered twice exceptional when he or she is identified as gifted and talented in one or more areas, while also possessing a learning, emotional, physical, sensory, and or developmental disability, right? Does that sound okay to all of you? Okay, so we're there. Notice I'm not telling you anything new in this. We're just summing up the day or the conference in terms of twice exceptionality. So how do we know that a twice exceptional learner is twice exceptional? And I made a point of having us look at their strengths first. I mean, that always has to be the way we look at these kids, both as we're identifying them and as we are actually trying to support them in our schools. So you can see on the cognitive strengths, and again, very difficult to do when you're thinking about all the different categories of twice exceptionality, right? So basically, if you said they had something in common, you kind of got a little of that from the movie itself, but we might be talking high verbal or high spatial abilities, and I think we saw that. Sydney was an example of the high spatial abilities when we looked at the movie. High verbal, you heard from those students even correcting their own language, right? Harry. You know what Harry's doing these days, right? He's an improv comedian in New York, doing well. So they do come out of this. Good problem solving and reasoning abilities, a high level of background and vocabulary. Even the young man who was talking about being on the isthmus, right, with his braces, was using very descriptive language, right? So that piece seems to be there. And we were talking about an emotional behavioral disorder with that young man. Making connections between events and ideas, grasping abstract concepts, hold apart, seeing the big picture. All of those kind of gifted characteristics we've described about our general gifted kids seem to be here across these categories. High-level thinking on complex tasks, frequent out-of-the-box thinking, so there's that little creativity piece that's in there in what we're doing. Curiosity and frequent question asking, and then frequent challenging of authority or information that's been provided. How many of you are shaking your heads yes on that one, right? And if we then look at the concerns, I tried not to list any that really didn't apply generally to most of our categories of it. So we are talking about issues with memory in many or most cases, lower executive functioning in terms of planning and organization in particular, slower processing speed in most cases, difficulty with working memory, and difficulty with word retrieval and organization of ideas, and lower auditory and sequential processing. Have I left any terrible ones off that I mean bad ones, concerns that I should have on that list for all of our categories? I'm trying to keep the list smaller than our strengths, because I think we have to start with the strengths in what we're doing here. And then when we look at what we know about twice exceptional learners in the different content areas, this was the closest I could come to kind of synthesizing what's going on in short, concise terms. So let's look at the strengths in mathematics, a good, strong grasp of the concepts of mathematics, right? There are going to be exceptions, but you do see that in many of those students. Logical and symbolic thinking at high levels, coming up with alternative but new solutions to things in mathematics, and relating maths to novel situations, right? Then we get to the concerns. I think we know the concerns. You don't need to have me read them to you, right? Those are the students who have the specific learning disabilities, in particular in maths. In reading, deep comprehension and inferential thinking, high-level vocabulary and background knowledge, high-level discussion and questioning skills, and grasps themes and main ideas. So that kind of abstract piece of intellectual giftedness is very definitely here for most, I think, of our twice exceptional learners. But in reading, as we know, particularly as we go into the specific learning disabilities, there are some issues, and that you have them there. And then in writing, we heard a couple of the parents talk about the issues with writing, right? And first they said it was boy, but there may be more to it when we look at the little bit of research we have. So in writing, creativity and originality in their ideas and thinking, they can come up with content and ideas and information. They have high verbal elaboration, something we can really build on as a strength for them, and unlimited ability to give detail and description, and high-level vocabulary again. You see it across more than one field of study here. But again, difficulty with the writing, getting it down on paper, difficulty with spelling, grammar, punctuation, all that kind of thing, and difficulty with organizing and sequencing a piece of writing, right? Thank goodness we have a lot of assistive technology these days that can help them put that sequence in place as they do that writing, that allows them sometimes to dictate what they need to say, so that all they have to do is edit what's on the page. So assistive technology is something we really need to seriously consider for many of these students, I think. And as Susan Baum says in her words, it's a tool, just as glasses are a tool to help you see. It's not that we're enabling them, we're keeping them from learning things they need to learn. It's a tool to use. So let's make good use of it if we aren't already. I imagine many of you are. Social and emotional, I think maybe I'll just move ahead on this, but you can see they have a chance to be leaders in all this. There is a creative streak, I think, in them, and they can be leaders, particularly in areas of personal interest, but also they can be leaders to take people off track, right? Now, my husband was one of those. I wouldn't call him twice exceptional, but he had a good job of doing it. He was constantly in trouble in school. I'm glad he's not here to hear this. He's at the hotel. No, he's down in Sydney. Like I said, shows skills in leading others. I'm saying that that's a positive thing because the leadership piece is there, and we had such a lovely keynote this morning on leadership. It was just a pleasure to hear. And in terms of emotional strengths, they can experience intense emotions. And I sure don't want an automaton around me, do you? I'd like to have them able to express their emotions. They frequently engage, though, and I don't know if, I think in a way it can be, trying to do things perfectly. Sometimes it's putting that challenge up for yourself. It doesn't necessarily make you dysfunctional, but wanting to do things well, the motivation to do it, and seeing the personal implications of task success or failure. And again, we've got the concerns, which I'm going to gloss over because I think we spend a lot of time on those particular concerns. So what happens if we don't put out effort for these students? And I see this as kind of a continuum of consequences, as I said up front. So you decide where you see most of the ones you've had experience with functioning at this point, if you think about what's going to happen in the long run. So they may have enough persistence and will make it on their own. They have their personal catalysts which will take them where they need to go. Very positive view of what's going to go on. And if you looked at that list and believed any of the names you saw in that first chart I showed you, obviously that was the case for many of those people. So I had to put it on our continuum. They could be overlooked for advanced academic opportunities, such as advanced placement or IB programs, because of their disability. You can't be both. You can't be gifted and have a disability, right? They can get lost in the cracks. Only some will be able to make it. Has anybody reached their point on the continuum yet? Okay. Be perceived by their teachers or family as lazy. They could do it if they tried. They're seen as average, often in schools, as the disability masks the ability, right? There may be an increase in antisocial behavior, oppositional behavior, defiance, and dropping out if we're not doing something to help these students along the way. They can be bullied in school by others because of their differences, right? And no matter how many bully programs we try to put in place, I think that is still happening, right? And at this point, it seems like we do more programs for kids who are being bullied about how you can be resilient against the bullying rather than actually curbing the bullying that goes on in school. Am I correct? Yeah, which is a worry. They increase their feelings of isolation, right, if we're not making some effort to support them. It may increase their levels of anxiety, depression, and an ability not to function well in the world around them. They may sometimes be included in the adult world in terms of what they do with the rest of their lives after they leave school, but only if it's something they do that no one else can, right? Do you see a truth in that or not? Yeah, something to think about. And then the worst of all consequences, I think, they could become the recluses, the hermits, the school shooters, I'm sorry to say, the cult organizers of our future, right? So where were you on the continuum? Kind of in the middle? It'd be nice to be number one there, right? But somewhere in the middle? And I'm not threatening that if we don't do the effort, they're all going to be school shooters or cult, establishers, but it's kind of interesting to think about what the consequences are if we do change our focus to some other thing, a couple of years down the road, and I certainly hope we don't. So finding them. So this is it. Now we're getting into the effort we have to make, and I'm keeping this short. So to find these kids, it can be difficult. Hope I'm not discouraging anyone. As I said, I think there were some promising practices being described, especially going on here in Australia at the present. So when the giftedness is often masking the disability, a child can get along fairly well in class, and we don't recognize that we need to support the disability, right? So they may look average, they may look above average, but that giftedness is covering for them. And it may not be until they get to secondary level, year 7, year 8, that it really hits the fan, right? Or the disability can be masking the gift or the talent that the child has so that the child doesn't get along very well in class, right? The child is seen as average, or slightly above average or slightly below average. But, we don't need to worry about that one. And that's been a real issue with identification in the United States, I think, at this point. You have to see a child not functioning well in a class before you go to special ed measures. And it's kind of a worry. We have some position papers out on it through the National Association for Gifted Children, and hopefully people will read those and become aware that we can't allow that to happen. What do we need in finding these kids? We need a measure of ability that shows at least above average performance on that ability test itself. And I'm saying around 1 standard deviation above normal. So if a child had taken a test and they had a 115 on either an individual IQ or on a cognitive abilities test, something along that, you would want to look at that child because we would assume that with a disability, their IQ is probably depressed, right? So 115, 120 might be a place to look. and start searching about whether or not there is a disability so that that child can be identified or not identified as a twice exceptional child. We want a measure of discrepancy between ability and actual classroom performance. So how big is the difference between the child's ability level and what we're seeing as performance in the classroom, right? If there is this big discrepancy, then we may be looking at twice exceptionality there. And I think people who are in my identification sessions kind of saw how we tried to resolve that problem in finding our twice exceptional students. The discrepancy measure is really important for us to look at because the greater the discrepancy between those two, and I think you probably know with something like the WISC-5, if you're doing the WIAT, the individual achievement test with it, it will tell you whether or not you have a significant difference between ability and performance. So there are lots of correlating tests that can be used that will tell us that information and tell us perhaps how severe that actual disability is. If it's very, very severe, we are going to need a specialized education plan for that child, hopefully with the giftedness at the very top of what we're going to do for the child, how we're going to support that giftedness. But if it's not so severe, maybe we need to come up with a different way that we develop an education plan for this child, and I'll share one that I think has a lot of potential for us at this point. We do want to know about the child's levels of self-efficacy. And I've selected a few up there. They're not the only ones. You probably all are aware of the Mental Measurements Yearbook, which is an electronic database and has thousands and thousands of different instruments in it, and will critique the validity and reliability, the norming samples, all that kind of thing for each of those different measures when you're looking for that kind of instrument for your students. So you don't have to use the ones I've pointed out there. I've used them. And I found that when we actually do interventions for children with twice exceptionalities and measure them in terms of self-efficacy, intrinsic motivation to learn, those kinds of things up front, we can make huge ground with them by the end. It maybe will take a little longer for the academic to follow through, but not much longer, because once that motivation is up and their willingness to try a little bit harder than they were before, we do see the academic gains follow in short order. I developed a screener, but I heard some very interesting findings about a couple of screeners that are being developed here in Australia as well, so you want to look around. But I did put mine under my parallel session. If anybody wants to take a look at it, there's a handbook of scales and ratings that can be, so I think I was section 18 or whatever it was in the World Conference website, so you can go in and get that if you want to see the instrument itself. And then we want parent input into what they see as the child's learning strengths, right? They're also aware of what the other things are, but we definitely want that positive information, start them out on a positive note. And you notice that the parents in the film did that quite well, didn't they? Yeah. And then maybe use a data collector to put that all together. And I'm not going to show you Baum's talent plan right this minute. I think we're going to look at something before it. But I think it has a lot of potential for us in terms of developing a talent development plan for kids with twice exceptionality. I'll share a second one with you as well. But in terms of how you actually do the identification, what we found in our study, our government study, was that it really had to be a 3-tier system. And the first tier was kind of a screening, looking for discrepancies in general among this child. And that was followed by Tier 2, which were some instruments that told you specifically about learning disabilities. And this was at the point where, or all kinds of disabilities, but it was looking at the point where you could rule out a disability, right? So, you know, is this somebody who's a true underachiever and it has nothing to do with a disability or disorder, or is it a disability or disorder of some kind? And then Tier 3, which is the real fine gold standard instruments that really classify a child as having that that disability of a kind, the more expensive ones, right? And I wanted to say, and you'll see it again in another slide quickly, but the Wechsler Intelligence Scale 5, how many of you have used that? Yeah, quite a few. I think there is a lot of potential in that, the way it has been developed, to understand not only giftedness and all the processes that are involved in that, but also the exceptionalities. What kinds of processing issues are we dealing with? So it is I think, a superior test to what we've had in the past to help us really understand what's going on in that mind, that twice exceptional mind, as well as the gifted mind. So we'll talk about that again in a minute or two. So there are the tiers, which you saw, and you can go back later if you want to look up those particular tests. I'm not near my time. 5 minutes? Okay. Thank you. Okay. So tiers. So here is Susan Baum. I'm giving her total credit for this. I love it because it's such a positive instrument, right? First of all, it's called talent. You know, it's talent up front. We're developing talent in these kids. And she has these components: reasons for the plan, taking stock, times of personal best, hopes and dreams. Doesn't that sound good? Now, taking stock is where you're going to put all of your measurement information, right? But you're going to put other kinds of information too. And she does fill this out. She did give me permission to use this. So here are the reasons we're developing a plan for this young person, right? Now, the thing I don't like about it is it starts right out with kind of negative reasons why we're doing the plan, right? But in the next column, you're going to see the positive ones show themselves, right? So we know he's not focusing in school. He has stress-related symptoms. He has problems fitting in socially. Taking stock. This is a child, I believe, in year 3. So he's decoding at 6th grade level, is 3 years above grade level in math and spelling. Loves to draw and build. So you're getting those positive strengths that the child has, right? Superior or superb visual memory, preference for nonfiction, passion for gourmet cooking. Don't you like that? And drawn to music. So we've got taking stock of the child, right? Times of personal best. I think this is my favorite column, right? Because you hear from the teacher, you hear from the family, and you hear from the student, him or herself, right? Have any of you used this? Oh, I just think it's lovely. But teacher input works well with adults one-on-one. And we don't know whether that's the giftedness or the twice exceptionality, but I would say we would expect that to come from the giftedness, perhaps. And that is best when he's completing challenging math assignments, right? Positive again. For the parents, when he's cooking, this is a time of personal best, discussing nonfiction material, drawing, and singing in church, right? And for the student himself, when he's doing science, notice he doesn't mention the math, right? Cooking and drawing. So what about hopes and dreams? We're going to hear from each of them again, very positively, I think. So from our student himself, he says he wants to learn something new every day. Have we heard that before? That is what the student is saying. Imagine the decline in frustration, if you could actually realize that, you know, for someone like this. From his mother, that he develop friends, right? That he have talent development opportunities. And from his father, that he is happy and stays eager to learn, right? So hopes and dreams. So how can we do that? And then from the teacher, that he learns to stay focused and become self-regulated. Okay, yeah. Okay, got a lot else there we could be doing, but there we go. So there we go. You've got input from everyone now, and I have not filled this in because what you would do here is think about the menu of things that are offered in your school. It doesn't always have to be a gifted opportunity, but if this is a child that likes cooking, are there after-school classes that the student could attend? So this would be very individualized for the student himself, but starting with all you had in hopes and dreams and personal bests to put your plan together for this child. We know we're going to address the disability, and we know pretty specifically how to address the disabilities we have, but we have to start with that positive piece of this child if they're going to buy in to what we want to do. So what are content options for them? What would you have said for content? Well, off the top of your head, based on science and maths, right? Continue with the challenging maths. Those are a start, right? He liked drawing? Maybe there's art that can be involved. He liked music? Maybe there's music if that's offered in your school. But we can kind of see where we can go with that. and then what would be the talent development options. But to me, it's a less formal, strict plan that we have to stick to, but still lets us recognize exactly what we have in front of us, right? Now, I know my time is getting very short here, so I've just said some quick little rules of thumb here. Don't look far from the family tree, right? That if you're seeing it in the child, it may turn out that the family didn't know that it was in the family already, right? This is good with everybody taking photos. I wish I'd thought to bring my iPad to do that. There have been so many good things up there. There are 3 places to look for twice exceptionality in a school. One would be if you have self-contained classes or cluster classrooms, right? Is there a child in there who doesn't seem to be thriving? And are you going to blame it one more time on underachievement, or does it turn out that there may be some kind of even a mild disability or disorder in what we're doing there? So a self-contained gifted class makes it a little bit easier for us to find these kids. The second is a mixed ability classroom where the student may be seeming to do average work, but at times the teacher will just see a spark. There'll be something open-ended or a discussion, and you just see that spark in the child, right? So that's important. And again, that's one where you really sit down with teachers, I think, and have them look more closely at the students in their class. And then in the special education testing situation, if you look at the discrepancies in the scores they collect on ability, and if those discrepancies are substantial between indices or between subtests within a single index, that can tell you a lot about a possible disability or disorder. I think it's important to pay close attention to the severity of the disability. There may be some developmental differences when we talk about ASD and ADD, and particularly we'll find them easier in the early years. But those, the severity of the disability will really help us figure out what are the tools we need to help address that child's disability, right? And then finally, if you have a school nurse in your school, and hopefully you do, they're a very important part of this identification process. They probably know more about that child from whether the child takes drugs, Ritalin or, whatever the latest is for ADD or not, and who comes most often to the office and needs to talk or have a breather, that kind of thing. So they can actually provide a lot of good information to the school about maybe the child's low points. So does it get any easier? Yeah, the ground rules are your first and foremost job is to teach to the child's gifts and talents, and I think I've made that pretty clear in what I've said, followed by accommodations or adaptations to ensure the child's success. But the opportunities we provide are gifted and talent development opportunities. We never water down that curriculum. We find other ways for the child to access that curriculum. No strategy lasts with a 2E child. You're lucky if it lasts a week, or you can do it 3 or 4 times, and you better pull another tool out of your toolbox. There are a lot of toolboxes out there, lots of books out there to help us with that now. Project to Excel, which was this Twice Exceptional project, has a website through my university. You can still get in, download for free. All of the teachers who are in my program had to identify their 25 best working strategies that are in there, and then we have a huge toolbox of strategies too. Take them if they're useful. There are lots of resources to help you as well. And the fourth one, just to get back to that idea of strengths, don't water down that gifted curriculum. These kids can do it. In fact, the most interesting thing is in this year, I've been working with the Rising Scholars program, and twice exceptional learners are in there. They're not quite ready for a full-time cluster group. They're close. But they were the first ones when we gave them the support using gifted materials to be able to move to exceeding growth targets on the state assessments. Faster than our culturally diverse, it took them about another 6 to 8 months to get to that same place. But the twice exceptional really have a lot going for them, if we give them access to that curriculum and then show them the way they can get into the curriculum itself. I think that's probably enough, but I did want you to know about Beverly Trail. Have any of you looked at her book, 2011 book, Teaching Twice Exceptional Gifted Children, or students, I think. And she has kind of a more formal learning plan in there, individual learning plan, with 5 outcomes that you want for twice exceptional students. And the first thing you do is assess where a child is on the first outcome, and then you look at the interventions that are provided and decide where where you want to start with this child in terms of where they are on their behaviors. And then you write down your plan from that point, a SMART goal and a plan. And you do it for each of those 5 areas. I've had students do that in a couple of my classes, and it's made remarkable differences with their students. Now, that's anecdotal. I haven't collected it in a more survey kind of approach. I got 1 minute? Okay, 1 minute. So I won't tell you about each of these kids. Don't tell my husband. Bill's the first. Oh, don't tell my husband that I'm doing this, but it's my son, Bill, who went to a school, elementary school, primary school, that was very open. So there were no walls, lots of noise. And he could handle it for about a year. Maybe he could handle it for part of a year. And then he just couldn't stay with it anymore. He could not stay focused. I wouldn't have said he was ADHD. He was ADD. They never recognized it because he still managed to do fairly well in school. By the time he went through high school, he wasn't doing as well anymore. But he got to college. He could set his own spaces when he was going to take his classes. And he's a very productive graphic designer today, probably the most creative and conceptual one I've ever met, but he also works at home. There's no distractions. So it's still there, but he's a well-functioning adult. Jacob is one of my grandchildren. I remember at 7, he was galloping around our house. We had wooden floors, and he just loved the sound of them, so he would just gallop, 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 and never stop. And in high school, he discovered rugby. Football was too easy, so he took up rugby in his high school, and he has his energy under control. He can focus. And then I wanted you to know about Josh, who was our ASD, and I worried whether he would ever live a normal life. And he's now finishing up his senior year at university in a dorm with 17 other kids exactly like him. They all are in computer engineering. They are best friends and will be best friends for life. I have no question that he's going to succeed in life. I don't know whether he'll make that list we saw in the beginning, but I think he's well on his way. So what do we get if we do put out the effort? We get people who are functioning adults that we can be very proud of in our lives, and we get successful people in all walks of life. And certainly Australia has theirs. You have your Richard Branson, don't you? My goodness. I don't know if the man has ever learned to read, but look at what he's done, his creativity, his entrepreneurship, all that kind of thing. So we're going to see those people in our thing. So last words, and I know I'm over, and I apologize. Most important strategy is to focus on the individual child through his or her strengths, passions, and personal characteristics that would make him or her a good learner. Once we see what those strengths are, we must identify strategies that complement those strengths in helping to overcome skill gaps in whatever domain they may lie. And we have to remember that these children, although very gifted, will always have to work harder than their intellectual peers. So we must start off early to focus on the value of hard work and putting forth effort. It's a good lesson, I think, for all children with gifts and talents. Thanks very much.